boundaries are.
Mm, I love this. I love this. I hope everybody who's listening, first of all, let me just repeat the name of the book. It is Set Boundaries, Find Peace, Reclaiming Yourself. And I love the visual that I get when I hear set boundaries, find peace. It reminds me of a practice that I teach around creating energetic boundaries when we're practicing meditation or rest practices. And it's like the peace is found in the center of the circle of the boundary that you draw.
Mm-hmm.
It's not found outside. And so I really just love, I love all of this. And I know that you're also a therapist, correct?
14 years, yeah.
And do you have a practice, like just tell us about your practice.
Yes, so I have a group practice. It's me and about 7 other therapists. And I started a practice about 12 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and much of my work with clients has been around relationships. And sometimes that's couples, but
Mhm.
most of the time for me, it's been individuals and really helping them with anxiety, depression, family relationships, partnerships, work life balance. And the center of it has always come back to boundaries and really what they need in these spaces and how to execute what they need. Because so often we don't think about how our relationships impact our mental health. And it's a huge factor. I can't think of one person I've seen in counseling that doesn't talk about a relationship. You know, they
Yes, yes.
they come in and it is not always about their partner. It's not always about dating. Sometimes it's mom, dad, sister, friend, work. You know, we have relationships with all sorts of stuff. And we're constantly talking about these things. And what we're really talking about is our expectations, our limitations, how we don't feel loved, how, you know, people have harmed us and sometimes they don't even know about it, how people haven't showed up for us. And we start to talk about how do we create relationships that make you feel less anxious?
Mm,
How do we get you to advocate in your relationship so you're less depressed?
mm,
How do we start to work on the work life harmony piece so you are not so stressed about
mm,
your multiple roles in life?
mm.
So it's been from the beginning. I would say, you know, my first client, we talked about enmeshment. It was an adult who was trying to create some autonomy away from their family of origin. So we talked about like becoming an adult in an enmeshed family. And so from the very beginning, my work has been around boundaries. And I think a lot of it is the lens in which I sort of see things, right? Like I
Mhm,
see it from this
mhm.
place of boundaries. So I'm like, oh, okay. So, and it's funny because I don't always use the B word. I use a bunch of other stuff like you need to differentiate, you need to separate, like all of
Right.
these things,
Korea, yeah. All
which
the
really
little
mean
words.
boundaries.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
really mean
yes.
boundaries. But, you know, I'm using all of this other sort of language to come back to this one thing of it's okay for you to want certain things in life. And how do I help you live the life that you want?
Mm, beautiful. So I want to segue into the subject of sacred rest. Yeah. So my book, Radiant Rest, came out on March 9th. Um, and a big part of the book is about creating boundaries, and also being able to, you spoke to these kind of multi-dimensional beings that we are and all the responsibilities that we have in the world, being able to carve out time to be able to have the rest that we deserve, that I refer to as being our birthright.
Hmm.
And you are talking about this space of entitlement that we all have to have space and something that belongs to us and something that's ourselves. So just I want to segue into this idea of rest and I'm curious in your practice and just over the time that you've been a therapist, how does rest kind of play in to family dynamics and boundaries? What have you noticed?
Well, I think that particularly with Black folks, we have the spirit and we have been taught in some ways that we have to work much harder
Mm-hmm.
to be good. We have to work very hard to get into a good school, to go to college, to perform in corporate environments. And that message is anti-rest. It
Yes,
really
it
is.
is. Yeah,
You can't
absolutely.
you can't rest when you got to work hard all day. And
Yeah.
it is actually stressful, and it doesn't give us the ability to really get into rest. So sometimes a lot of my work has been convincing people to rest.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
I'm a rest convincer,
Yes.
and a therapist.
Yes.
So sometimes not just for Black people, but women,
Yes.
for people who um, are the breadwinners in their family,
Mm-hmm.
for people of color who are immigrants, all sorts of things where we have not had the time or the messaging that rest is important. We've had the messaging of be more productive, be more productive. You got to beat them. You got to
Mm-hmm.
beat them. And my theory is, well, you got the job. I think you was good. Now you can definitely relax. They will catch me relaxing,
Yeah.
because I've made it. I got the job. Now you can relax a little bit, and your standards does not have to be anyone else's. I think we can actually be very productive after a good nap. You know,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
Lots
Yeah.
of research showed, taking a 20-minute nap every day, especially in the middle of the day, it just revives you. It revives you.
It's a complete reboot. And I know that there's some people that feel like they're so busy that they don't have 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And so my question is always like, what are you distracting yourself with? What are the ways in which you kind of waste time? And
Hmm.
start reducing those things and adding time to be able to rest. Even if you can just take little 3-minute rest periods throughout the day, a couple of times a day. And before you know it, by the end of the day, you've had, 20 minutes of rest. And rest is productive. Um, and one of the things that I really love is this practice of Yoga Nidra. And so Yoga Nidra is the practice of yogic sleep. And
Mm.
yogic sleep is this sleep with a slight trace of awareness that really allows you to touch into your true self. It allows you to trust your inner knowing and to form a relationship with your inner knowing. And so I really feel like this idea of that you were talking about, we always have to ask, are my glasses cute? Is this look cute? It's really the fact that we don't know how to listen. We don't know how to listen to ourselves, and we're always looking outward for the answers, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so when we're really practicing some of the spiritual practices of yoga nidra or sacred rest, we get to really rest in who we are. And the more we're kind of in that vibration of who we are, the more it becomes familiar to us. And I
mhm.
feel like that's also a place that we can rest. It's kind of in our inner knowing. Um,
Rest is a personal boundary.
mhm.
And I think sometimes we put our rest on other people, like they have to give us the time to rest.
Yep.
When I think it's more of we have to take the time to rest. I saw someone say, I don't have 20 minutes to nap. I used to have an internship when I was in grad school, and I can't remember what I was doing at nighttime, but I know I wasn't sleeping well. But anyways, uh, I probably was up on the telephone or something. I can't remember. But every day for lunch, I would go to my car and go to sleep. That was my
Yep.
lunch. I
Yep.
would eat my little sandwich so quick. I probably ate that sandwich in 2 minutes, And for the other 58 minutes of that hour, I would sleep. Uh, and I would
Yeah.
get up and I would feel great and I go back to work. Because that's
Yes.
what my body needed. I mean, about 11 o'clock, it was like, you stayed up too late. And I was like, you're right. And I would just go take my nap and come back, and I felt really good. And, even now, sometimes I'll look up and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of tired. Let me go take a nap. And I just, take a little 20-minute nap,
Yes.
wake up, feel great. And sometimes, even if I don't fall asleep, I'll just turn on a little funny TV show and just lay in the bed for 20. And that could be lunch. I think
Yeah.
you have to figure out how to pull the rest into your life, how
Yeah.
to I love to fall asleep meditating. That's just the best way to fall asleep to me.
Yeah. Have
Um,
you tried yoga nidra?
no, but now that you
Oh,
mentioned it, I'm like, I think I already do it.
I think you're already doing it. I think you're already doing it. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just so restful just to, you know, um, lay there and just breathe. It's like I'm asleep.
Yes.
Even
Yeah.
when I get a massage, they will say, what part of your body hurts? What do you want us to work on? I said, I have come here to sleep. So
Yeah.
I just want to fall asleep. That's the only
Yeah.
reason I want a massage. Like, just
Exactly.
rub my arm and I'm gonna fall asleep. Please
Yeah.
don't talk to me.
Yes. Right. We're not having a
We're
conversation.
not having a
We're
conversation.
yes,
I
I
just
agree
want to
with you
fall
on that.
asleep. Yeah.
And I also think that it's a matter of reclaiming, because we have to stop asking for permission for the things that we need, the things that
Hmm.
are going to allow us to thrive. And I don't believe that you can fully be thriving without being rested. I
Hmm.
don't believe that you can really be thriving without understanding your own inner knowing and
Hmm.
trusting it and having just tasted just a touch of your true nature.
Hmm.
That is real power, that allows you to really know that, yes, I'm actually going to take this boundary. I'm actually going to take this separation or differentiation, as you said earlier, because I deserve it and it's what allows me to thrive.
Hmm.
Um, so I wonder if there's any questions in the chat here that we can answer.
I saw one earlier that we can address that said, um, is having too many boundaries a bad thing? Can
Mm,
boundaries ever be rigid?
hmm.
So there is a such thing as rigid boundaries, and those are typically ones in which have no flexibility, and we apply them as blocks, as
Hmm.
walls, as
Hmm.
barriers to connection. So we may say, um, I never make friends at work, or I never let people come over my house, or I never tell people anything important. Those are blocks to keep people away.
Hmm.
Now, in terms of too many boundaries, I think I don't count boundaries, right? So
Hmm.
I don't know what's too many. I think
Hmm.
you can have rigid boundaries, which would be unhealthy, but I think most people, if we counted their boundaries, maybe it would be too many. Like, if like, I don't know. And too many is so relative. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think
I,
what is being said there is someone who has the messaging of, you are too much, you need too much, you ask for too
mm,
much. And that is not necessarily true when people say that to you. It could be true, but it's
mhm.
not always true. Sometimes people will say that and you've asked them two things and they don't want to do it.
Right. I can, on the flip side of that, so I used to be someone who had a lot of boundaries, and those were boundaries that were inherited from my dad because he was very strict. So we were not allowed to have friends over ever to our house. We were not allowed to watch television. There were no boyfriends. There was no anything. You had to be on time. Like, if somebody said 7 o'clock, you better be there at 5 minutes to 7, or you would be considered late. So I kind of carried that over when I was out of my house, that if my friends would show up late when we were meeting each other, I would say, okay, you have 15 minutes. And if you show up I'm leaving. And it was like, and one day I was like, wait a second, why am I doing this? Why am I creating this boundary? This boundary isn't even mine. This is someone
Mm,
else's boundary.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so, luckily I figured that out in my early 20s to be able to start softening the boundaries that were creating separation from people that I really loved.
mhm,
It was creating separation from my friends,
mm.
right? And
Yeah.
and so I think examining boundaries is probably a good practice.
I think that's a very beautiful point that sometimes, especially early on, a lot of our boundaries come from the boundaries that our parents had with us. And so we start to take those into our lives as if they are truth. You must be on time because my parents said people have to be on time. You can't have people over your house because they didn't like any people over their house. But I think it's a really good thing to just practice what feels right for you. I
Mhm.
always grew up with, and you tell me how you grew up, ketchup in a refrigerator or a cabinet.
In the refrigerator.
Okay, I grew up cabinet. I've changed it to refrigerator. I've
Well,
changed it.
well, that's funny because my beloved is always like, "Why are you putting the ketchup in the
Sounds like you need
refrigerator?"
two ketchups.
Yeah, and so it's like there's one extra one there, and he doesn't really use ketchup that much. So, but yeah, yeah, I love that.
And I think that's where we have to go with it. We have to start thinking about what do I like and what was I taught that they liked? Because
Mhm.
I found that I really like on a hot French fry, I like a cold ketchup. I don't
Yeah.
want a room temperature ketchup. Even though I
Mhm.
grew up with it, I dealt with it for 18 years. In trying something different, I said, oh, that's not that's not what I actually want. That's not that's not my preference. And we have to start to think about what is my actual preference. Do I really care if people are on time? Do I really want people at my house or not? Do I really, because sometimes we just get into the motions of stuff. I remember someone telling me one time, every time they make spaghetti sauce, they put sugar in it. And they
Mm.
asked their partner, why do you do that? And they said, I don't know. Like, I don't know why I do that.
Yeah.
And so then they ask their partner's parent and they say, oh, you do that so is not as acidic or
Acidic.
something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I too grew up when you put ketchup in chili sauce, you put it in
Mm-hmm.
spaghetti sauce. I didn't know why.
Yep.
You just do it, right?
We put ketchup on eggs, right? That's how I grew up.
Or
It's like
sugar, not ketchup.
you put
Yeah.
ketchup on eggs, and it's like people look at you like, why are you putting ketchup on your eggs? This is how I grew up. But now it's sometimes I put ketchup on eggs, sometimes I
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's important to figure yourself out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Boundaries, all of the things, because sometimes you will find that you prefer mayo over Miracle Whip. You prefer friends who come over to your house versus friends who don't. And so you have to figure out as an adult what works for me, not what worked for my parents, not what,
Mm-hmm.
what I was taught, but
Mm-hmm.
what feels good for me now.
Mm-hmm. I have another question for you because some of the practices that I teach and that are in my book, Radiant Rest, are about energetic boundaries
Hmm.
and being in meditation and kind of creating an energetic boundary that you feel is kind of held by your ancestors that are well in spirit. And
Mm.
then another boundary that is like a healing boundary where you can kind of call in your healing tools. And then another boundary that's like a boundary of protection of the wisdom keepers of your lineage or elders. And people, especially during this time of the pandemic, it's one of those practices that I feel people are getting the most out of. And I don't know why, But I do know that what comes back to me from students is that they feel that creating these energetic boundaries sort of start to show up in real life. Like they're actually able to feel more empowered to create boundaries with people around time and around their rest because they've been creating these energetic boundaries around them. And I'm just wondering, as a therapist, what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, well, I think we know like when we have energy shifts, and I think it's, again, it's one of those things that I think of energy like intuition, gut, like all of these things. And sometimes we are not very in tune to listen to our energy,
Mm-hmm.
and we dismiss it.
Mm, mm, yeah.
And so energetically, I think that is, that comes after you've had some work around authenticity,
Mm,
around being able to communicate the boundary. And then I think the next phase would be like recognizing, when your energy is shifting, because sometimes we're so out of touch with ourselves that we may not be able to understand the energy.
mm,
Like when you walk in a room, you're like, oh, the energy is off. Like,
mm-hmm.
the way someone speaks to you, and you
Yeah.
like, oh, she don't like me and I just met her. It's like,
Right, right, right.
ooh, it's some energy
Yep,
here.
yep.
Some of us will keep talking because we're used to people being like this. And it's like,
Mm,
no, this is a time where you actually need to understand what's happening, and this is not a healthy connection for you. Um, I think we're so out of touch with that. And like you said, it's that reclaiming piece. Like we have to understand that it is in us, and we have to find a way to really listen to ourselves. Oprah has a podcast where she's doing all her old shows.
mm,
And one of the shows is about intuition. And
mm,
it's these stories of people feeling like something was off, but they were
mm-hmm.
like, nope, I'm going to do it anyway. And they
Yep.
ended up in these very violent situations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some guy said something to them outside of their apartment building, and they felt like it was creepy, but they were like, I have to be nice to people. Hey, how are you? Talking to this person, guy run up in their building, and, just all of
Yep.
this stuff where it's like, you felt that was wrong.
Yes.
But there is something in you that says, I must be nice to someone who is creepy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that literally is a betrayal of yourself. That's
Yeah.
literally going against your inner knowing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think practices like meditation and yoga nidra are so important, because they allow us to touch into that place that knows and
Mm-hmm.
knows that it knows.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a place within us that's always resting.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can actually touch into that place that's always resting, I feel like that becomes a refuge for us at any time, no matter what we're doing. If we're cooking, if we're breastfeeding, if we're working, we can always touch into that place. Um, yeah, intuition. I've had a lot of hard lessons that I had to learn very early on, not listening to my intuition. So,
Yeah, we sometimes want something different than what's being given to us. And so we will bypass our intuition because it doesn't fit what we want sometimes. you know,
that's right. That's
yeah,
right.
especially in relationships when
Oh, trust me,
when
I
we
know
really
that
want
story.
something to work.
Yeah.
That's why we have so many good Mary J. Blige songs, because it's like she's like, against my intuition, I trusted you.
That's
It's
right.
like, yeah, because we know, and it's just like, no, but I want this to work, so I'm going to pretend that that's not even happening, and it's like,
Yeah.
but girl, it
Yeah.
is happening.
Yeah. I
Um,
just had this conversation with Light Watkins where I talked about an old relationship, and it was basically me projecting the person's potential onto them and not the reality.
mhm,
So that was my own fault, to be able to
mhm,
see, I see you, but I also see your potential, and I'm just going to pretend that your potential is the relationship. And it's like, no, no.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit of, well, I'm not going to say potential, but my dad is tall, and when I was younger, I had long limbs, and so potentially I was going to be tall, right? It didn't happen. I never
Yeah.
reached my potential. So I have long fingers and a long torso, and people are like, you can't fit that, but you're short. I'm like, I know, but this part of me is long. Like, it
Right.
never happened for me, people. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you have to accept what is and not, oh, let's do this because in the future, it's like, but right now, in the
Be present.
present, this
Hmm.
is what you have. You cannot wish stuff on things, on people, and you cannot make them what they are not. You cannot hope for anything that, people don't hope for themselves. And that's really tough to be in relationships with people and to be present in who they are, because then sometimes we have to change our relationships with them, and that's not what we want to do.
Yes. There's nothing I can say to that because it is 100% true. 100% true. I want to honor your time. Uh, and I really want to just thank you so much for being flexible and switching this over to my page.
No worries.
How can we find you? How can we order the book?
Yes,
Tell us
yes.
all the things.
So I am Nedra Tawwab on Instagram. If you pull up Nedra, I'm probably the first one. There's not many Nedras in the world. Funny story. Every about twice a year, I get an email and say, "Hey, my name is Nedra too."
And is there what does Nedra mean? What does it
Um,
mean?
in Hebrew, it means awareness. That's not why I was named Nedra. There was a lady in my parents' neighborhood that they knew named Nedra, and my dad liked the name and just named me Nedra. In some research, I have found that it means awareness.
Mm.
So you can find me on Instagram at Nedra Tawwab. My website is Nedra Tawwab. On the website, I have some free worksheets and quizzes and other things for you to look through. I am most present on Instagram. The book is Set Boundaries, Find Peace, and it is available everywhere that books are sold. And that's the book right here, right there,
I
that little
see.
colorful one.
Yes, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much for joining me.
You're
It's been
so
an
welcome.
honor. It's been a real honor. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you so much. Have a
Bye.
beautiful day. Bye bye.